So fellow Toastmasters, welcome to Speed's Exceptional Workshop Series. Speed, Speaking from Experience Advanced Toastmasters Club. We meet on the first, third, and fifth Wednesdays of each month. And on the exceptional Wednesdays, the second and fourth, we occasionally have an exceptional workshop. When I joined Toastmasters 3 years ago, there were three things that I noticed about Toastmasters. The first one is that all of us, well, I'm just going to speak for myself, I love to learn. I love to learn new skills. I like to improve my existing skills when it comes to public speaking and leadership. The second thing I quickly picked up is how supportive we all are to each other and for each other. We all want each of us to improve, and we create a nurturing environment to do that. The third thing, though, is I found that Toastmasters like to share. And this has manifested itself in the workshop series that we have here at Speed. So tonight we're in for a treat. We have two exceptional speakers who are going to share their expertise and knowledge in their field. Do you want to write and deliver speeches that are unforgettable?
Yes.
Interactive. There is a definite process to keeping your audience engaged and connected. For thousands of years, speakers have used a variety of rhetorical devices to add rhythm, flow, and energy to their speeches. Tonight, Joanne Knowlton, will show you some simple yet effective speech writing techniques. Once you start adding them to your speeches, you will develop a deeper connection with your listeners. By approaching your speech writing with your eye on crafting a beautiful line and your ear on the power of sound, you capture and hold your audience. Be unforgettable. See and hear how to add punch and pizzazz to your speeches. Please help me welcome Joanne.
Thank you very much, Mr. Toastmaster Andrew. And welcome, everyone. Have you ever heard an evaluator say, "Your speech was clear and concise, but there was something missing, some pep, some vitality, some energy"? Have you ever been halfway through your speech and felt, "I think I'm losing my audience, and I don't know how to get them back"? Have you ever wanted to craft a beautiful and impactful line of writing? Welcome to the world of rhetorical devices. What are they? Let's start with the basics. When you think of the word rhetorical device, does anyone have a description or a few words that they think of to define that term? Anything come to mind?
Metaphor.
Metaphor, great. Language, Gerardo?
Maybe.
Maybe. Something over here, Carlos?
Alliteration.
Beautiful. Exactly. Let's look at a grammarian's definition. The use of language to make your message more memorable, to keep your audience connected and engaged, impactful. Let's look at a poet's definition. The tools used by orators to enchant the soul. Wouldn't it be wonderful, speakers, to feel that you've enchanted the soul of your listeners? Our goal is to be memorable. Our goal is to be unforgettable. And tonight I want to talk to you about some techniques in order for you to add some pizzazz, some pep, some vitality, some impact to your writing. And look at three things. Repetition. There's many forms of repetition, and we're going to look at a few. We're going to talk about them. Alliteration, we've already heard it. As kids, it was a favorite thing for us to do is to play with sounds. Betty bought butter, but the butter was bitter, so Betty bought better butter to make the bitter butter better. Alliteration is a sound, is that sound that's in a word that you use multiple times. And finally, chiasma. Now, chiasma is one of those Latin words that's hard to remember, it's hard to say. It's chi like sky and asthma like lung, chiasma. But here's an example of one. You may not have heard this before, but you know what it is. Three Musketeers, all for one and one for all. How about this one? If you fail to plan, then you... Exactly. These are chiasmas. They're a fun way to add rhythm and energy into your speeches. And what all these things have in common is rhythm, cadence. They give some flow to your speeches. I want to start with repetition. In this group, we've talked about repetition in our evaluations. Raise your hand if you know what the term foundational phrase means in public speaking. Okay. Foundational phrase is a phrase that is embedded multiple times into your speech that really anchors the speech by telling the listener exactly what it means. That's an example of repetition. Tonight I want to start with an example of repetition delivered by Bobby Kennedy. Now, I'm going to set this up. It's 1968. Bobby Kennedy is campaigning in Illinois. That day, during the day, he'd been doing some rallies at some universities. That evening, he was going to be talking to a primarily black audience in what was called a ghetto, when I did my research. And Martin Luther King was shot that day. So his handlers really didn't want him to go in to deliver his speech that evening with some concerns about violence. But he took his campaign speech and he put it away and he delivered a very powerful, impactful message to that audience. You could imagine the energy in that room. Some of them were just hearing about King dying, being murdered that very day. So I want to look at and listen to one particular excerpt. We get to hear this line one more time. So listen for the repetition and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it. Please go ahead.
All right. What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness. But it is love and wisdom and compassion to one another and a feeling of justice towards those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black.
Thank you. So when you see this, clearly the repetition is at the front of the word, at the phrase, what we need, what we need, what we need. What do you think, hear, or feel after listening to this excerpt? Anything come up for you?
Inspired?
Okay.
Uplifted.
Uplifted. To me, one of the beautiful things about this is, now he could have said, we don't need division. We don't need hatred. We don't need violence and lawlessness. But what does he say? He says, what we need is. What we need is. What we need is. Then he goes into love and wisdom and compassion. And on some level in the listener's mind, they're still saying, what we need is love. What we need is compassion. What we need is a feeling of justice towards one another. So quite brilliant. The other thing that he does here so beautifully is he brings us from current situation, a very tragic day in the history of the United States and in the world. And he lifts us up into another place where we could be, of love, of compassion, a place where people are safe. So one little excerpt from one very important and powerful speech. Example of repetition used beautifully. So Steve Jobs, probably most of you know this. Steve Jobs delivered a speech in 2005 to the Stanford graduates, a convocation speech. It's otherwise known as Stay Hungry, Stay Foolish. Raise your hand if you've ever heard about this speech or read it, seen it. Okay. And I'll set this quote up. He told the audience, of course they're university students, just graduated, that he was going to tell them 3 stories from his life. And this is the setup for the 3rd story. He told them that he had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and that his doctor had told him to get his affairs in order. Then I'm going to show you this, this excerpt. He later in the speech tells his audience that it so happens that his form of cancer is operable. So in fact, at that point in 2005, he believed that there was, he was not did not have a terminal disease. Who can read this for me? I've got it here on a card. Any volunteers?
It means to try to tell your kids everything you thought you'd have the next 10 years to tell them in just a few months. It means to make sure everything is buttoned up so that it will be as easy as possible for your family. It means to say your goodbyes. Thank you.
It means. Again, where's the repetition? It's at the beginning of the phrase. Thoughts, feelings, opinions when you read this? How does it feel? You remember his audience. Yeah.
So when I see it means, it really doesn't mean anything. It's not, it's very objective. It's very high level, like it's like a definition. But when you get to by the end of the sentence, you know he's talking about something that's very personal. So he starts with something that's like a sledgehammer. Like, I want your attention. It doesn't mean anything. You don't know what he means. So they're kind of like empty words until you get to the end, and all of a sudden those empty words are full of emotion.
And we all, as speakers, if we can get our audience to self-reflect, we know we've got them. My sense, this is his 3rd story. It's a very poignant story that he's telling his audience. My sense is that he wanted them to self-reflect, that life may look pretty grand right now, but you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And you don't know what's going to happen to the person beside you, your neighbor, your friend. And he wanted to just tell them, set them up for that. It means to. Now, a speech on rhetorical devices would never be complete without talking about the extraordinary Martin Luther King, in particular, the speech, I Have a Dream. He used a number of rhetorical devices, including repetition. He repeated many phrases, the most famous being, I have a dream, which is repeated 8 times. He repeated words multiple times. The word freedom, 20 times. The word we, 30 times. Justice, 8 times. If you only looked at Martin Luther King's phrases that he repeated and the single words that he repeated multiple times, if you just looked at that, you'd know exactly what his message was. So as writers, if we can use these powerful tools of repetition in our speeches, we can really anchor our message. Writing for a reader, you would probably want to use a synonym, but writing for an audience, you want to keep anchoring the message by hammering and punching those words. So let's have a look at King and what I chose here. The repetition is now is the time.
Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children.
Thank you. Again, when we look at this example, the repetition of the now is the time is at the beginning of the sentence. Any observations as you read and listen to that excerpt?
It's a call to action.
Yeah, isn't it? And it's like now. Now is the time. It's not before, it's not tomorrow, it's now. Brilliant. Now is the time. He uses some, this is a little bit a departure from talking strictly about repetition, but look at the contrasting metaphors. He goes from dark and desolate valley to a sunlit path. So he's moving us from here up to here. He keeps lifting the audience with what could be. He lifts us from the quicksands to solid rock. These contrasting metaphors are so powerful. Now is the time. I love that he used verbs rise and lift, picking up his audience with him. Really quite a beautiful segment. You may recognize this. My friends, love is better than anger. Hope is better than fear. Optimism is better than despair. So let us be loving, hopeful, and optimistic, and we can change the world. Jack Layton. When he wrote these words, this was a letter to all Canadians. So where is the repetition here in this segment? In terms of this, where is it in the sentence? In the middle of the sentence. So it doesn't really matter. There's devices that lock you into look at repetition at the beginning of the sentence, at the end of the sentence, or in the middle of the sentence. So there's all kinds of ways that you can do this as you are writing.
All this will not be finished in the first 100 days, nor will it be finished in the first 1,000 days, nor in the life of this administration, nor even perhaps in our lifetime on this planet. But let us begin.
Thank you, Rowan. So repetition, the first 100 days, end of the sentence. The first 1,000 days. Life of the administration, so he's building. He's starting at 100, 1,000. Life of the administration, or our lifetime on this planet. So there's repetition, but he's also building to a climax. Really beautiful example of repetition. And how does he end it? So these techniques, they're all persuasive. This is persuasive speaking. They want to shift the audience. Their goal is to change something in you, to make you do something, feel something that you haven't before. So these devices are very powerful tools as a persuasive speaker and writer. And before I move on, I will read one of my favorite, more recent, Malala Yousafzai, who won the 2014 Nobel Peace Prize. She writes beautiful speeches, and she uses repetition quite often in her speeches. And she was accepting her award, and she said, "This award is not just for me. It is for those forgotten children who want education. It is for those frightened children who want peace. It is for those voiceless children who want change." Forgotten, frightened, voiceless. Education, peace, change. That's what she's all about. There it is. Does anyone have anything to share related to repetition before we move on?
Madam Speaker, I would like to ask a question, if I may, at this point, directed to the... we know that some of these politicians that you've just illustrated in the last few minutes had the facility of having speech writers. Now, do we indeed have that information that it was them writing those words, or would it be a speech writer for them and then acting out the speech written by somebody else?
Well, that's a
Thank you
great
for taking my question.
You're very welcome. And it is a great question, and it's a question on my mind as well. I believe it's often a combination of efforts in terms of the speechwriter coming to the politician, if you will, with a speech and them adjusting it. There's that famous story about Martin Luther King and I Have a Dream. Now, King had delivered that many different speeches, and the night before the big Washington March, they were expecting 100,000 people, and 250,000 people showed up. His advisors told him, Martin, don't use the I have a dream. It's too cliche. It's too cliche. So he put it aside. He worked well into the night. He handed his advisors a speech that he was going to deliver. It was ready in the morning. He was the 16th speaker that August day, and it was incredibly hot. So he's halfway through his speech, and Mahalia Jackson, who was a friend and a gospel singer, who was on the sidelines, called out and said, "Tell him about the dream, Martin." At which point he puts his script away and starts with "I have a dream." But in that case, he was a very experienced speaker, and he was able to just take apart from one speech and apart from another and kind of put it together. One quote I heard about that speech is when he stepped down from the lectern, he stepped onto the other side of history. So repetition, a powerful tool to use as you write your speeches. So think about it from the point of a foundational phrase is repetition. Repeating the same thing in multiple clauses or phrases. It could be in the middle of a sentence or either end, or repeat words throughout. Powerful tool, repetition. Now I want to talk about alliteration. To add a little zing, and to just give you some focus as speechwriters. I don't know about you, I don't know what your process is, but what I find is once I understand my message, I can go back and craft and have fun and play with language. Make it come to life. Give it wings. Because that's what's going to connect you to your audience and make you unforgettable. So my last segment is talking about chiasmus. So that's the phonetic translation. So chi as in sky and asthma because the s isn't pronounced, chiasma. Let's look at some examples. So here's the device. So A-B, B-A. It's not ABBA, the band. Maybe that's where they got it. Their name? Who knows? It's A-B-B-A. We'll see some examples. So this is Les Brown. Tracy, can you read this for us?
We don't have to be great to get started, but you have to get started to be great.
So could you see using this in a speech sometime? Let's say your speech is about procrastination. Could you open your speech with, if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail? Could you do that? Would that spice up? Hello, are you looking for Toastmasters? Yes, not. If you're doing a workshop on planning, what a great little device to have in your back. If you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. This is a great one. If you don't have to be great to get started, but you have to get started to be great. Now, I tried writing my own chiasmus. They're really tricky. I mean, it's a simple formula. I live to eat, not eat to live. So you can look at a simple formula and see if you can exchange some words around. Play around with it. Let's look at another one. Here's Barack Obama. My job is not to represent Washington to you, but to represent you to Washington. And that's really is one of his main messages. And it's memorable. It's memorable. This is probably the most memorable chiasma that there is. And you didn't even know it was a chiasma. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And that is what that speech, that 1961 inaugural speech, when people think of it, they think about this quote. He also said in this same speech, let us never fear to negotiate, but let us never negotiate out of fear. Be who you are and say what you feel. Because those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind.
Who said that?
I just did. You know, there are lots of chiasmus rolling around the internet that are not associated with any one name, I must say. And I don't know who wrote this one, but I wish I had. Never let a fool kiss you, or there you go. You got the rhythm now. Another simple one. Finish this for me. Mankind must put an end to war, or
I've got a couple.
great.
In the end, it will be okay. If it's not okay, it's not the end. The Dalai Lama said, if you lose, don't lose the lesson. Maybe not exactly.
No, but it's there.
Close.
The lose-lose. So it's so interesting. All these devices, they're really about repetition, aren't they? Sound repetition, words repetition. I really like this one by Churchill. This is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end, but maybe it's the end of the beginning. And he referred to that at some point, it was through the war, where they were moving along, but they had a long way to go. The end of the beginning. It's not the beginning of the end, but it's the end of the beginning. Of course, Bard, the king of rhetorical devices, in a way. Who can read that right from their seat? How about you, Marilyn?
Good night, parting is such sweet sorrow. And I shall say good night till it be morrow.
Such sweet sorrow. Such sweet sorrow. And he also carries the shall say right into the rest of the passage. Good example of alliteration. Now, John F. Kennedy, in his 61 inaugural speech, with our alliterations, they don't have to be long sentences. They can just be little moments like this. We shall pay any price, bear any burden. Pay any price, bear any burden. High standards of strength and sacrifice. Strength and sacrifice. You don't even have to know, just think of those three words, standards, strength, sacrifice. And they paint a picture. Whether it wishes us well or ill. Repeating on the
Somewhere, at this very moment, a child is being born in America. Let it be our cause to give that child a happy home, a healthy family, and a hopeful future. Beautiful.
Thank you, sir. A happy home, a healthy family, and a hopeful future. And you even carried family future forward. Alliteration, a simple way to add a little bit of spice to your speech. Spice to your speech. To be playful, to perk it up, to add a little zing, and to just give you some focus as speechwriters. I don't know about you, I don't know what your process is, but what I find is once I understand my message, I can go back and craft and have fun and play with language. Make it come to life, give it wings, that's what's going to connect you to your audience and make you unforgettable. So my last segment is talking about chiasmus. So that's the phonetic translation. So chi as in sky and asthma because the s isn't pronounced, chiasma. Let's look at some examples. So here's the device. So A-B, B-A. It's not ABBA, the band. It's, maybe that's where they got it. Their name? Who knows? It's A-B-B-A. We'll see some examples. So this is Les Brown. Tracy, can you read this for us?
We don't have to be great to get started, but you have to get started to be great.
So could you see using this in a speech sometime? Let's say your speech is about procrastination. Could you open your speech with, if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail? Could you do that? Would that spice up? Hello, are you looking for Toastmasters? Guess not. If you're doing a workshop on planning, what a great little device to have in your back. If you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. This is a great one. If you don't have to be great to get started, but you have to get started to be great. Now, I tried writing my own chiasmus. They're really tricky. I mean, it's a simple formula. I live to eat, not eat to live. So you can look at a simple formula and see if you can exchange some words around. Play around with it. Let's look at another one. Here's Barack Obama. My job is not to represent Washington to you, but to represent you to Washington. And that's really is one of his main messages. And it's memorable. It's memorable. This is probably the most memorable chiasma that there is. And you didn't even know it was a chiasma. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And that is what that speech, that 1961 inaugural speech, when people think of it, they think about this quote. He also said in this same speech, let us never fear to negotiate, but let us never negotiate out of fear. Be who you are and say what you feel. Because those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind.
Who said that?
I just did. You know, there are lots of chiasmas rolling around the internet that are not associated with any one name, I must say. And I don't know who wrote this one, but I wish I had. Never let a fool kiss you, or there you go. You got the rhythm now. Another simple one. Finish this for me. Mankind must put an end to war, or
I've got a couple.
Great.
In the end, it will be okay. If it's not okay, it's not the end. The Dalai Lama said, if you lose, don't lose the lesson. Maybe not exactly.
No, but it's there. The lose. So it's so interesting. All these devices, they're really about repetition, aren't they? Sound repetition, words repetition. I really like this one by Churchill. This is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end, but maybe it's the end of the beginning. And he referred to that at some point. It was through the war, where they were moving along, but they had a long way to go. The end of the beginning. It's not the beginning of the end, but it's the end of the beginning, maybe. Fellow Toastmasters, I invite you to start to have some fun with language. Don't let it scare you. Use repetition in the middle of the sentence, throughout the speech, with foundational phrases and strong, powerful words that are going to anchor you. Play with alliterations. They're fun to do. It's fun to do tongue twisters, and that is always a good thing for a Toastmaster to do because it gets them out lubricated. And see if you can find, you wouldn't want a speech full of chiasmas because it might be a little bit much, but maybe there's one chiasma that'll just anchor your speech such that it gives it wings and it's delightful for the audience to hear. The rhetorical devices are the art of ruling the minds of men, and I might add, women. Thank you.
That's absolutely wonderful. I really, really enjoyed that. You learned a lot from that, and I love the examples that you had. And I'm hoping to be able to use that, some of those techniques for my next speech, or speeches that are coming in. What we'd like to do now is an opportunity for us to provide Joanne with some feedback in terms of her workshop over here. So Roman, would you like to provide Joanne some feedback?
I really enjoyed it, Joanne. I think the preparation that you put into this is visible, it was obvious. You were well prepared with the cards, and then when the speaker kind of bombed, you were there with a backup plan that worked better, I thought, because we could hear the voice and the interpretation by the readers. What I really enjoyed, and I think you could feel it in the room, you could see people's faces just change when we did the first couple quotes and we felt that emotion. And it really wasn't, you didn't speak to it, but I think that just kind of brought us right into what you were trying to do. Like it just emphasized the value and the strength of using these devices in a speech. That was so effective by trying to get the voice of the original speaker with the words on the screen. I think the two worked excellent. I can't see how you could do it better.
Very good. Danielle?
Very often people say they don't like when speakers go from one side to the other, but I thought you did it without efforts, and it didn't distract me. In fact, it kept me more attentive because I wanted to make sure that I was watching all of your gestures, and I felt connected the whole time. It didn't bother me at all. So surprising, because normally somebody would say, well, you should have anchored each point, but you didn't, and frankly, it worked for me.
Thank you, Danielle. Maria, would you like to give it a go? Yes?
Of course. So what I saw very distinctively here was that you walk the talk of the Toastmaster preach, so to speak, because they always tell you, leave the audience with 3 messages. No more, don't overwhelm it. And then build upon those 3 messages. And that was exactly what you did. We talked about repetition and reiteration and chiasmus. And you build it out with all these examples that it's hard for me to walk and not know what those words are anymore. Like a good class, a good grammar class where you go, you learn, and because you bombarded us with all those different examples, the message was clear. So very good, thank you.
Thank you. Very nicely done. Louis?
I love the slides. Very well done. You've got a wonderful presence up there. It really works well. Now, the one thing I did notice, probably because I'm the timer, was you spend 22 minutes on repetition, 4 minutes on alliteration, and 6 minutes on your chiasm. So it lacked a little bit of balance from that perspective. And I love the bit that you had at the end, when you're talking about 3 different types of repetition. You said sound, word, and then something else. I might have liked to see those 3 points on the screen. Just stay up there as your summary at the end, just as my take-home message. Because I think you've got a great,
As a student in progress, I will keep it very, very short. However, I have to quite honestly state that I enjoyed Joanne's presentation. I thought her diction was very, very well done, and the slide presentation as well. And I also loved her attitude and the way she was moving around. And I appreciated the fact that at one point she sort of asked the audience if there was any question or if anybody had something to contribute to. I love that very, very much. So in all, I really enjoyed it. Congratulations.
Thank you. Carlos?
Joanne, I love the structure. Really easy to follow. Your slides were simple, not overloaded. And a couple of suggestions would be when you made your analysis after a passage, I would have liked to have heard that passage again with what you had said in mind so that I could actually, oh yes, have that aha moment, which I might not have picked up the first time. So just a couple of passages would have, they would have been a little better anchored, I felt. And you made good use of the stage, like you spoke to all aspects of the audience. Just a couple of parts I thought were a little bit distracting was when you turned your back to the audience to get stuff over there, maybe have it placed over here instead. And what I liked the most was the audience participation. It really helped to bring out the emotion in each of the passages, so thanks.
But Joanne, I certainly did enjoy your presentation very well. I did learn a lot from it. What I liked about it was that you came up and you had a beautiful smile on your face. You were very energetic, and you seemed to really enjoy presenting to us. And it really drew me into the speech. And I just felt that it was, it was something that you presented it to me, you gave me something, so I can take away something. And I like what you said about giving wings to our speech, and I think going forward, I will have some wings to my speech to let it lift off. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. Beatrice?
I'm Beatrice. In fact, Helge just took a few words from my mouth. You brought a lot of energy to the stage, and I thought I connected so well with you because I love the use of your repetition, alliteration, and I can't pronounce it. Chiasmus. It was a great presentation for me, and I think I have a lot to take back and use it for my speeches because I haven't graduated so far, so I'm still on the process. So I have a lot to learn from here, and I think I enjoyed it thoroughly. It's great.
Thank you. Jeffrey?
Yeah, Jeffrey, I'm a guest. It's very challenging to comment after a lot of but I have to say I'm very enjoying your speeches. Impressive, very impressive. I like to see because I watch on sidelines, like watching like documentary, and you walk me through the history from west to east, and you have some interaction with the audience. And you just like directly repeat the past, so walking through the whole journeys. The only thing I found that when we reach the climax, you perhaps close your presentation. Maybe you have some conclusion, but you need to think a lot of things. But one thing I found that very good for me because I tend to write my speech using the symbol, not for the years. Because I want to make my sound like complicated, but I think your idea is very good for the years, right? Using simple words, same words, repeat a lot of times. That's the best takeaway for today, for myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I like your repetition there as well.
Yeah.
Impressive. Well done. You included already. Mayla?
Yes.
Would you like to say a few words?
Yes. That was a real pleasure to listen to. And I loved how comfortable you are in your own skin, just moving around. It made me relax. I love the choices of the quotes that you use because it's a good bet that most people have heard those speeches. And so when I was looking at the Martin Luther King or the John F. Kennedy, I could hear him speaking it. And I felt, especially the Martin Luther King, I was feeling fury because of all that's happening today and in the news about people being shot. They were great selections. One little thing that I noticed was you had the 3 words up in boxes, and I couldn't read them with my bad eyes. I couldn't see
Okay.
very well, so maybe a bit bigger, but
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Frank?
Joanne, I really like the fact that you use so many examples so that it helped me understand and digest the concept. Definitely for the audience, for me at least, easy to reapply to upcoming speeches. And I have to say I get very distracted by the noise coming from that room and the front, and if it was not from your speech being so captivated, I would probably have lost attention. So thank you for doing that.
Very good, excellent.
Joanne, you intended to give pizzazz and power to our speeches. Just by the way you picked these phrases, the words, the repetition, the special terms, you touched me. Because the sequence was just right to touch the audience. I was touched.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tracy?
I really enjoyed this. I felt I'm in a high school class, lesson the literature. I really do feel that way. I deeply enjoy me. That's my new experience to listen the Toastmasters giving the lessons. I really learned a lot through perspective from the content, structure, so distinctly, and then can vividly to still right now still can remember whatever you said. This is so takeaway. Second, you deliver so natural. I don't feel you seems like effortless. You don't need to put a lot of efforts and memory something. Just something naturally just come from you. This is most important, and I think every speaker, I really admire this approach. And then I'm most impressive is how you engage with the audience, and very naturally move from one to another. Even you answer people's question, audience question, and you naturally brought two in the whole speech and then deliver, and then merge it in your already. Not suddenly you come something, oh, I have to think about. Those all show your strong skills doing this, give this lecture. I treat this like lecture myself. I really enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Harry.
Yes. So Joanne, thank you so much for delivering this and this provide me with ideas for me to apply. I guess I'm the 7th person already topic mentioning this will be a takeaway for us. I like the way that you juggle between the slide on the board and then on the stack of paper. So juggling between here and then ask the audience to read, and sometimes you read on your own, right? You also, judging from the list of the examples there, you actually also apply the repetition stuff. Thank you.
Thanks, Harry.
Joanne, most of it has been said already, but I was feeling actually when you were presenting that you had such a presence and passion. It's a very interesting combination of passion and calm at the same time. That is so easy to abandon oneself to your words. You just guide me to take me, and I will be happy. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. So, I'm not sure your name.
Michelle.
Michelle.
Thank you, Joanne. I truly enjoyed it. As a very new Toastmaster, I paid attention to, I would say, almost everything. Your energy was great. The fact that most of us are aware of a lot of the examples that you used was very good. It brought us into your speech. So we didn't spend a lot of time trying to figure it out. We already knew it. And I loved your passion, and very much what other people said today. I saw the same thing, and thank you.
Thank you.
Marina. Joanne, that was a wonderful speech. Thank you. I've just completed my CC, and one of the lessons, the projects in CC, is basically how you say it. And this was an advanced how you say it. It was a super advanced how you say it. And for people who have been speaking for a while, you want to go back and actually look at those lessons, the fundamental lessons in the CC. Now I can put the cream on the top after listening to you. I can start focusing on things that are important like that as I move into my advanced manuals. You had great presence, great projection, great enthusiasm. I loved the examples that you chose because I can now, I wrote down the beginning of them so that I can now just go and Google them. So I can hear them and know how to say them with feeling. And yeah, that was basically what I got out of it. And thank you. It was great to hear. My ears are happy.
Thank you. Stephen? If we can just ask maybe a little bit shorter.
Sure. My ears are also happy, Joanne. I like the humor in response to the Dr. Seuss who said that. I did. It was just like it just was effortless, just immediate, so fast, like comic timing. I like the focus, like despite interruptions and noises going around, it was like you didn't even hear them somehow, completely unflappable. The only thing I would suggest, if you were comfortable with it, is drawing parallels to maybe music with some of this stuff. Repetition is used a lot in music in terms of a hook, like a chorus that goes over and over and over again at the end of a song. And even chiasmus translates a bit. It's a little more advanced, but as you were presenting, you could hear all this stuff musically. I really enjoyed that. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen.
I'll echo everyone else's kudos, Joanne. To save time was lovely. Thank you so much. One tiny little thing, when you had the picture of, I think it was Robert Kennedy on there, and it was one of twice that you said, tonight I'm going to speak to you about, which is really filler. Like, we know that you're here, and it was such a dramatic setting that you should have just put that on and said, imagine the scene, or this is the night of, and it would have just punched out with a little drama.
That was great. I actually love that you mentioned going from being a writer, where you would use a sentence, I'm trying to get the word out, synonym, that you would actually repeat for your speech. And so that really was detailed for me for going to that. And also going from writer to speaker and wanting to be presenter of a workshop. How do you get participation the way you got? You showed me, even things you didn't say, I'm picking up tidbits that were just gems, gold nuggets. I can't believe how brilliant. And I'm watching and say, okay, give the audience things to read. Get them involved by doing, participating, so you're not lecturing, even though you're teaching and educating, it's by them, by us participating, and I loved it. So thank you, I took tons.
Thank you. And Zoran?
I loved it too. It was unbelievable. I feel I learned a lot. Two key takeaways for me, I really enjoyed the way you conveyed the simplicity of those techniques. It started in very simple ways. We can focus on 3 techniques, very easy mechanism, but at the same time we can appreciate how limitless it is. How you mentioned like how much fun we can have, how we can play with the language, and we can turn it into so many possibilities, right? The other thing that I really enjoyed was the level of energy that you had. I feel that if you looked around the room, there was like really contagious, and everybody was so engaged and so captured by your speech. So thanks.
Thank you. Well done, everyone. Here is